Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Arias, and today we're going to be talking about Ginkgo Biowork's full year earnings and take a deep dive into their enzyme development presentation. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, and leave any video suggestions and feedback in the comments below. And without further ado, let's get into it. Let's jump right into the results from Q4 and the full year 2022. Ginkgo added 20 programs to their foundry in the fourth quarter, bringing the total to 59 for 2022, 90% growth year over year, and coming in close to the high range of their guide. That's a strong close to the year, with 1/3 of the year's total coming in Q4. As I've said before, in the early days of Ginkgo, with less programs maturing to success, the number of programs added is a secondary validation of Ginkgo's platform. As to add programs, they need to convince the customers that their dollars are best spent with Ginkgo. These customers are looking for the most assured and cheapest way to get their products to market, and them choosing Ginkgo is a direct endorsement of their capabilities. 2022 foundry revenue came in at $144 million, 27% growth year over year, which is fairly weak for what is supposed to be a high growth company. However, this was negatively impacted by two milestones that slipped from Q4 into 2023. I would like to see this rate of growth increase in 2022, and indeed they are guiding for that, as we will see on the next slide. They added $2 billion in potential milestone payments in 2022 alone, and that $2 billion number doesn't even include any royalties or equity they received. While even they admit that they don't expect to achieve all of these tranches, achieving even half over the next few years would be massive, with their current foundry revenues a little more than $150 million. Biosecurity revenue was down significantly year over year, but that's to be expected rolling off massive scale COVID testing. Overall, these were solid results in a tough environment in 2022. Looking forward to 2023, they expect to add 100 programs, growth of 66% year over year. This is a step down in terms of percentage growth, but this is to be expected off a larger base. I would love to see them exceed this guide, and management gave some indication that they intend to do so. Ginkgo also announced that they plan on altering their reporting practices and will only guide going forward to cell engineering services revenue, which is foundry revenue without any downstream value, and we'll talk more about this choice later. They guide for $100 million in biosecurity revenue in 2023, which is an area that remains uncertain, and thus the only guide to what they're entirely confident in. They ended the year with $1.3 billion in cash and equivalents after burning $300 million last year, partially offset by $72 million in positive earnings from the biosecurity business. This leaves them in a strong position going forward, with 4 years of runway at the current burn rate. This gives them room to get more customers on board and grow faster in a tough environment to maximize their potential. Overall, I'm satisfied with these numbers and this guidance, but it's important that they execute and meet these goals, as they're not astronomically high. Let's now hit a few of my takeaways from their conference call. CEO Jason Kelly hit two intriguing points right off the bat that I wanted to mention. First is that machine learning tools are a commodity that are or will be commonplace. The differentiating factor is data, and Ginkgo has data, loads of it. Not only do they have data, but they can acquire on demand whatever type of data is needed to solve a problem. This is a misunderstood point in my opinion. Another point that Kelly made that's central to Ginkgo as a company was that as more work is done on Foundry, the cost of this work will continue to decrease. This means more work can be done for less, making Ginkgo's offering more and more compelling to customers. This is one of those declining cost curves that will be so hard for Ginkgo's competitors to compete with in the future. Moving on to the financials portion of their deck, there's definitely room for improvement in their operating expenses. R&D increased 43% year over year and a whopping 100% quarter over quarter. G&A increased 115% year over year and 100% in Q4, although it only would have been 86% year over year excluding some one-time M&A charges. This is obviously a high growth rate, and I would like to see some austerity, especially with G&A, to help extend their runway in this environment. As I mentioned earlier, they stated they will not be guiding to total foundry revenue going forward, only cell engineering services revenue. This takes out the downstream value prediction that may or may not come true in a particular quarter, which was weighing on the team's ability to focus on the long-term goals and execute. I like this change because it incentivizes just that, a focus on doing the work right and executing on long-term ambitions, rather than quarter-to-quarter milestones that will get hit this quarter or next, without any significance in which quarter it falls in the long term. While they guided for solid growth of 65% year over year, they said they have higher internal goals that I would be glad to see them achieve. 65% would still be a tick up in growth year over year, as the segment only grew 23% last year after growing 73% the year before. Additional programs contributing to this growth in cell engineering services revenue are nearly all from growth in food and ag programs and programs in pharma and biotech. From Q4 of 2021 to Q4 of 2022, the number of active programs in biotech and food and ag over doubled to 34 and 37 programs respectively, while the number of active programs in industrials shrank and the number of consumer and technology programs and government programs stayed flat. They again specifically called out pharma as a growth lever, saying that these customers are used to outsourcing work, but they need to see data to indicate that it will be accretive. Ginkgo now has this data and is using it to sell with great effect. Additional programs don't just lead to additional fees, but also lead to larger downstream value portfolio, as you can see from this chart, with their value of potential future milestones skyrocketing in 2022. While this is filling up a massive pipeline of future potential revenue, keep in mind that over half of this increase is from a single customer, Selecta. The clear focus on increased milestone revenue is evident in this chart. As you can see, nearly all new programs are coming with milestones. Some of these are coming with royalties too, and some are just royalty programs, but there was a decrease in equity programs year over year, showing a decreased focus there and an increased focus on tangible cash in the future. They did mention that they do still own some equity of about 14 different companies and said that they would decide when to sell in a case-by-case basis. This is somewhat of a change of tune from what they had said previously, when they said they would only sell when that company was no longer benefiting from this technology. Shifting biosecurity for a second, half of their 2023 biosecurity revenue is coming from long-term recurring sources, a drastic departure from the past where most biosecurity revenue was from volume-based COVID testing services. This is where Kelly directly told investors that he thinks this is misunderstood and not being properly valued, and I tend to agree with him here. At first, I thought biosecurity would be a COVID-only business, but they have started to successfully roll it into a business with long-term potential. Back to their change in accounting practices to break out cell engineering services, as the call went on, analyst after analyst came on and applauded their choice to make this change. Additionally, Jason Kelly addressed a question about founders selling their shares and explained it by saying much of these sales were used to cover taxes from the vesting of RSUs and were from pre-planned sales that could not be altered. The founders still own over 20% of the company, and that's enough for me. Kelly finished by saying that their project funnel is the healthiest that it's ever been, and that Ginkgo remains very flexible to move and take advantage of new markets that may pop up. Before we move to enzyme intelligence, Ginkgo gave us this excellent slide about how to think about the value of their biopharma discovery program. There are two parts of the slide. The first is a high-level NPV calculation. This occasion I will let you read for yourself, but incorporates R&D fees, probability of technical success, and milestones, and the probability of commercial success combined with how many royalties they expect and how many commercial milestones they expect. They illustrate that to the left with a chart with about 10 million of R&D fees in the first 2 years, 100 million in milestones ramping up from years 4 to 12, and then 400 million to 950 million in total royalties. This is illustrative of how lucrative just one of these programs could be if it hits technical and commercial success. Let's move on to the info from Ginkgo's Enzyme Intelligence event, posted on their YouTube channel. First, a high-level framework for how Ginkgo attempts to improve and evolve enzymes. This process has 3 broad steps, starting with discovery, which is primarily made up of sourcing databases for organisms that have the desired characteristics to some degree. Once they have a list of genetic sequences, they launch into what's called computational design. Computational design uses unsupervised machine learning to attempt to find better sequences for the specific desired trait. Then they take all this data and feed it into a program called OWL, which we'll talk about with much more detail on the next slide, but seeks to further improve the strains. All this capability is fueled by Foundry's massive scale, flexibility, and responsiveness. Foundry's on-demand testing capability gives Ginkgo scientists and algorithms access to more information than anyone else trying to do a similar thing, which should allow Ginkgo scientists to achieve massively better results. Not only does Ginkgo have access to new testing results on demand, but all of the old ones are saved, giving them a massive pool of data to come back to for future use. Let's circle back to the third step in their process of enzyme optimization, OWL, and dive in with more detail. Step 1 is taking the data gathered in this discovery and computational design phases and using that to inform the creation of the dataset for further evaluation. As you will see on the next slide, they find a protein library for testing, synthesize it, and test it. Now they have a set of proteins, their sequences, and their performances. They then use machine learning models to learn sequence activity relationships, or basically what sequence translate to what activity. Then they use these models to inform the creation of a new protein library for further evaluation. They repeat these steps of finding a protein library, testing it, training models on it, evaluating its performance, and if necessary, continuing iterating on it and creating a new one. Now let's move on to the first case study, which illustrates this process, where they were trying to optimize a protein for improved performance. They started with the company's seed enzyme over here and created a library with all the sequences in blue for the first round of testing. They synthesized and tested the dataset to find an initial hit shown here. They then chose to create and test the second protein dataset shown here in green. The first dataset shown in blue is a diverse set, allowing a large sample space to be tested. The diversity of this first test set allowed them to find their initial hit, because if they were stuck only testing sequences around their initial seed sequence, they would have never found this initial hit. The green is a smaller, more localized dataset to the initial hit, attempting to find further improvement over this initial hit. At this point, they would test the second dataset in green, evaluate its performance, and then either continue to iterate or stop there if they've achieved the desired performance. In this second case study, they achieved a 10x improvement with their OWL optimization. This case has a few unique aspects as it is a big molecule that is resistive to enzyme engineering and has a multi-step reaction with an unknown rate limiter. Gen 1 was a 2,000 strain library created using self-supervised machine learning models and some computational analysis to determine how these proteins would dock together, and it achieved a 1.5 times improvement. Gen 2 was another 2,000 strain library using more self-supervised machine learning and hit recombination. Gen 2 achieved a 3.9 increase in performance over the original strain, which is impressive on its own, but there was much more to come. Gen 4 was a 4,000 strain library guided by OWL-based design, which unlocked an improvement of 4.5x over the original. By Gen 4, they were ready to focus in on a much smaller 100 strain library, whose design was only based on OWL, and finally achieved a 10x performance increase. This 10 times increase in performance has truly profound implications for the company that this was developed for. Of course, this is a specific successful case that has many failures along with it, but it demonstrates how capable Ginkgo is. In the third case study, Ginkgo is tasked with improving the specificity of an enzyme. The company's best enzyme over time would create significantly more byproduct than target, only making 10% of the target over time. Ginkgo used 11 design, build, test, learn cycles, testing over 10,000 enzymes and finding an 8.8 improvement over the customer's best strain, as you can see in the graphs on the top right. They achieved 75% product specificity, up from the 10% the customers had before. This again is a major improvement from below and will allow the customers to run significantly more profitable operations. These are a few excellent examples of how capable Ginkgo can be. However, I would really like to see some more data around how many of these programs are successful versus not. This would give both investors and potential customers more confidence in Ginkgo's current capabilities. Clearly, the top-end capabilities are high, but Ginkgo's success rate is the other piece to the puzzle. A few quick notes from their Q&A session before we move on to the big picture with Ginkgo. For calling back to the elements of the discovery process, metagenomic sourcing is pulling genomes from various databases that may be able to accomplish a specific goal. The goal of this is to jump around the search space to find hits. This allows Ginkgo to get out of local maxima because they are more fully exploring the sequence space. In the past, they have found enzymes with 30% similarity that get better results than the original strain. Ginkgo has a remarkable advantage here because of the massive number of tests that they can run, and thus the data they can collect. Ginkgo has said that they've tested over 100 million enzymes in the last 2 years alone, which works out to about 137,000 enzymes per day. This is visualized here in this chart with the number of tests run grouped by what reaction they catalyzed and color-coded by project that they are related to. This is a huge advantage that Ginkgo has so many tests already run that they can use to inform further development for their customers. Now for my Ginkgo bull case. I think synthetic biology is an immensely powerful tool that humans are just scratching the surface of for use for our own benefit. There is also a huge need to rapidly improve the tools that we have to tackle an ever-changing world. Ginkgo has the two key tools to do this. Foundry is the base that the rest is built on. Ginkgo can do more tests, collect more data while using less resources. This allows them to contribute to their database of knowledge, which they call the codebase. This allows them to drive results for customers faster and with even more certainty. Essentially, Ginkgo is getting the flywheel started on doing work to drive high-value results with synthetic biology. Other companies who have not started this flywheel are going to have a tough time getting it going and competing with a company like Ginkgo, who has already gotten it going in a big way. To sum it up, Ginkgo has a massive opportunity and the best expertise, and despite working in a very uncertain industry, that still leaves Ginkgo with a chance to be a huge success. I'm still buying Ginkgo, which makes up about 4% of my portfolio, with a cost basis of $3.87. If you've stayed this long, check out my playlist of Ginkgo videos in the description, going over everything I know about Ginkgo, from the basics to getting really into the weeds on the company. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.